right, everybody. Welcome to BO Boys for Wednesday, December 28th. It's a raw feed. We're doing it live. I'm Clayton.
Yeah, I'm Pat. And Clayton, we're coming to you in the middle of this holiday week. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy holidays. Happy Honda days, whatever you celebrate. And we're doing a big double episode, a big, weekend review, weekend preview, whatever you want to call it. But the main thing is we got Santa Claus himself, the man of the season, is here. He's here to bring us the presence of box office knowledge. The legend, Scott Mendelson, now of The Wrap, is here.
Yeah.
I was so used to saying Scott Mendelson of Forbes, but
yeah, me
he got
too.
a new gig.
It was 9.5 years.
Wow.
But no, I mean, I jumped ship. And, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty politics because there was no wrongdoing on, any way, shape, or form. But I am now at The Wrap. I am one of their film journalists. I'm no longer doing the daily box office beat, and I'm no longer doing reviews, but I'm doing sort of catch-all, jack-of-all-trades film journalism, which does occasionally involve box office, and especially if it's not stepping on the toes of the people that do that already there and do it very well. So, it's some streaming commentary where appropriate, as well as, looking into some of the overseas markets, what's going on with China, what I predicted 7 years ago. What's going on with India? That I don't know, but it's interesting. Could India be the new China? I'm not sure.
So you're a big film journalist now at The Wrap, but your box office coverage, I feel like it's now even more of a scarce, important resource. And I am happy that that resource is available here on the BO Boys. It's your appearances were always very important, very something that everyone craved, and now it's even more important than ever. So thanks for joining us, Scott. So I think we got to get right into it. This is a huge week. We got Avatar 2 that you're going to walk all of us through just how Way of Water is actually doing. There's a lot of competing theories. Of course, your theory is the only one that matters. So Clayton, why don't you take us through the top 5, and we're going to go with the 4-day grosses. So what happened from Friday, December 23rd through this Monday, December 26th.
All right. So number 1, Avatar, The Way of Water. It had a 4-day of $95.5 million. This is its second weekend. Puss in Boots was number 2. Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, made 19.2 in its 4-day in its first weekend. Number 3 was Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody, which made 6.75 million in its 4-day. Number 4, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, had a 4-day of 5.5 million. And number 5, we had Babylon, which made $4.8 million in its 4-day.
All right, so we're gonna have to get to Babylon at some point, but let's start off with the big one, the one that I think has gotten the most box office chatter out there, Avatar 2, Way of Water. So last week this opened up, Clayton and I had to calm the masses, a lot of people online trying to say this thing was a disaster, nobody wanted it. The only thing people ever are going to want to see are superhero movies. James Cameron is a failure, and he always has been, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Clayton and I calmed the masses. Movie theaters are not closing down. Avatar 2 was nowhere near a disaster. It's going to make billions of dollars. But we've now got a second weekend in the books. And the thing Clayton and I kept trying to hammer home is it's all about these 2 weeks. It's about the weekdays. It's not even about the second weekend, but it definitely isn't about that first weekend. So now we're through Monday, December 26th. The grosses are in. Scott Mendelson, what is your big picture thoughts on Way of Water? Is this a flop? Are movie theaters done, or are things doing fine? Or what's your take on this right now?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think movie theaters are going to live and die by the periodic overperformances of tentpoles like Avatar: The Way of Water or Top Gun: Maverick. the biggest problem facing theaters right now. Overall domestic box office for the year is down around 30, well, will be once Avatar's finished in terms of movies released this year, will be down around 39% from 2019, which is terrible. But there's been about 40% fewer releases this year compared to 2019. And that's the problem, for a variety of reasons. COVID caused post-production delays, certain studio programmers like the man from Toronto or Shotgun Wedding being leased off to streaming. Certain theaters, certain studios like Disney being a little skittish, probably more than they should be about theatrical.
Mhm.
And MGM is now part of Amazon, so we don't know if that is they're even still on the board in a broad sense, other than periodic temples like Creed 3. So, but as for Avatar: The Way of Water, one big thing. James Cameron likes to talk a big game.
Mhm.
He has a certain amount of earned hyperbole and earned arrogance. I'm pretty sure when he said the movie had to make $2 billion to break even, he was kind of talking a little shit.
He was
Uh,
he was kind of joking. I mean,
Yeah.
not joking, but and we'll get to this guy later. The Rock is someone who seems to want to set a very low bar
Mhm.
for the success of his movies. James Cameron, he's the king of the world. He wants to set a high bar. That $2 billion number, we all know that he's kind of making Avatar 3 while he's making Avatar 2. And this movie really didn't cost $1 billion or whatever is going out there. So that's our take too, is that the
Yeah,
$2
I
billion
mean,
number is kind of phony baloney.
if it really is, again, I don't know. This is totally speculation.
Right.
If the movie cost $450 million, the most expensive movie ever made, okay, fine, whatever. And they spent $250 million to market it, okay, fine, whatever. That's what, 700 million? So you need double that to break even. 1.4 billion. It might get there in a couple weeks, and it's not done yet.
Right. Right.
Do I think
That's
the film's going to make 2 billion? Maybe not. It
Okay.
crossed $1 billion worldwide tonight. Or I'm sorry,
Yes.
whenever this is recording, last night. It took about 2 weeks of global theatrical release. It did it about as quickly as Spider-Man: No Way Home, despite a much smaller overall opening weekend, domestically and worldwide. The weekday numbers have been fucking nuts for this picture.
Yep.
Shocker! Who could have seen that coming? Oh wait, because I mean the picture delivers on its audio visual promises. It looks fantastic in IMAX 3D. It looks fantastic in Dolby. It looks great in high frame rate, assuming you like high frame rate. That's a more complicated conversation. And most people who are going to the movies, even if they don't think it's the greatest thing ever made, they're thinking they got their money's worth. And they're telling their friends that they, yeah, this is fun. Go see it. Take your kids.
Right.
The other thing that I think we're going to have to look for is this film was almost always going to be leggy by rational standards, at least even in terms of Christmas releases. But it might be even leggier than we'd expect. I'm not saying it's going to be as leggy as the first one or Titanic or anything like that, because there's almost nothing coming out in early 2023, especially if you don't like horror movies. All due respect to Megan and M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin, which I'm sure will do very well on their own, respectively. And there's been so much chatter about you need to see this film in IMAX, or you got to see it in 3D, you got to see it in Dolby, that I think there's a larger percentage, even if it's a little bit, a larger percentage of audiences that are waiting until weekend 2, weekend 3, weekend 4, or 4 days after Christmas when everybody's off of school, so they can get the seats they want in the auditorium that they prefer.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. We found that to be the case. We found that this is a movie that is, people are picking their spots. They know it's going to be out for a while. They know it's going to have the PLFs for a while. So they know it's not going to be a case of like Maverick, where Maverick had the IMAXs for what, 2 weekends maybe, and then it started trickling off. This is going to be a movie you can see in 3D IMAX for a few weeks when the kids are out and they can pick their right in the middle, whatever that is, they're going to do it. Now, Scott, they've been comping this to Rogue One. I see this getting comped to Rogue One a lot. Now, do you think that is a good comp? is because, or should we only be comping this to Avatar 1? Because, it seems like this is performing the way an Avatar movie performs.
Yes and no. Generally speaking, when you think of leggy Christmas blockbusters that weren't crazy leggy, and by that, Avatar, Titanic, Jumanji, The Force Awakens, which is still one of the most leggiest movies ever to open above $100 million. It made 248 in opening weekend and legged out to almost 4 times that number by the end. That's nuts, even by Christmas standards. Aquaman made 335 from a $72 million opening weekend. That was the leggiest live action big deal superhero movie since Tim Burton's Batman in 1989.
Whoa.
So yeah, I mean, it's. But in terms of regular Christmas legs for big movies, The Hobbit 2, I'm excluding The Hobbit 3 because it opened on a Wednesday. Rogue One, Tron Legacy. Those are films that made under 3.5 to 3.9 times their respective 3-day opening weekends. And if we play in that sandbox, then Avatar: The Way of Water will make about double what its 11-day total is. So right now it's at what, 295? So over under 575 seems to be the basement.
Right. So
now,
then at that point,
sort of 800? No, I don't know.
Right.
But,
so at that point, it seems like this will, because Rogue One made 530 million domestic total. It's going to end up higher than Rogue One, but maybe not in a completely different league.
Yes.
Not in that 700 domestic.
Yes.
I mean, let's talk about the high end. Do we feel that high end is still on the board, where Avatar 2 Way of Water is a top 10 domestic of all time? It's bumping up against Maverick and the original Avatar and Black Panther. Can it get to that level? What is the path where that happens?
Will it? I don't know. Can it? Absolutely.
Okay.
Because again, not to be a cliche, but don't bet against James Cameron. I'll be very interested to see what the next 3 days of weekday grosses are like. And again, even after everybody goes back to school and business as usual, there just aren't a lot of movies opening in early 2023.
Right.
And that's, again, all due respect to the horror films that, Megan could absolutely overperform.
Right.
I've seen it. It's a lot of fun. It gives you what you want from the previews. It's the kind of movie that, yes, I wish it had been an R, because there are times where it feels like it's holding back, but my 11-year-old had a blast.
Right.
And
Megan could be the Black Phone, Knock at the Cabin could be old.
Yeah.
And Cocaine Bear will probably be snakes on a plane, but it could be,
which by 2023 standards would be great for an original non-franchise, whatever, R-rated picture like that.
Absolutely.
I say that with all due respect.
Yeah.
But we don't have, unless I'm forgetting something, we don't have a Bad Boys for Life or a Sonic the Hedgehog level movie opening in January, February. So Avatar Way of Water.
Eventually mid-February, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Right. Okay.
And
so
that's
that basically
when things kick off.
So we've got 6 weeks about where Avatar Way of Water, barring a Cocaine Bear or Knock on the Cabin, really has theaters to itself. And probably another week or 2 weeks almost where you're going to have a lot of people home from work, a lot of college kids home from school with nothing to do. So it really has almost 2 weeks where the weekday grosses could be absurdly high.
Yes, and that's where the magic is made. It's Christmas legs are unlike any other spot in the calendar. I remember growing up, and this is probably before your time, but a movie like Mouse Hunt which opened the same day as Titanic, by the way. Titanic, Tomorrow Never Dies, and Mouse Hunt. That movie made 10 times its $6 million Friday to Sunday gross. Sabrina, which in 1995 was a remake with Julia Ormond and Harrison Ford. It under opened with about $5 million and legged it to 52.
Wow. It's just a great time to be a movie theater. It's not a great time to be every movie, as we'll get to, but it's definitely a great time.
You gotta open. If you can open, then
right.
hope.
And do you think that this movie, because I think the thing that we're hearing a lot of is like all the Cameron movies, there's always and I don't want to say haters, it's a, it's a term that's beneath all of us, but there's definitely an audience always rooting against his stuff. And I think especially today, there's an audience that roots only for superhero movies, and anything that's not is something to root against. And I think that camp is setting up the absurd success of Avatar 1 as the success line, which is just it's such a straw man. You can't have the greatest thing of all time and expect to have it happen again. This movie is not going to make $2.9 billion.
I wrote a lot of posts in late summer, early fall 2015, right up until the release of The Force Awakens, saying that while it probably would make a gajillion dollars, here are some reasons why it might only make most of the money. As I like to say, instead of all the money. And obviously it did turn out to make all the money, but I still had people on my social media feed swearing it was a flop because it didn't crack 3 billion. So, and this is an ongoing problem with people who don't have any clue what the hell they're talking about, trying to lead the discourse. And this isn't just movie box office, this is culture in general. I mean, you know this. But you have people on TikTok that with millions and millions of views talking about how Avatar: The Way of Water was a flop because James Cameron said it had to make $2 billion on opening weekend.
Right. And you know what? James Cameron, he sets the bar high, and somehow he's going to cross that bar. And it does seem like people, listen, Clayton and I saw this. We like this movie. We're not apologists or anything, but we like the movie. It gives you what you hoped it would give you. And it does seem like this movie has good word of mouth, and it's a movie that is delivering what people would have wanted it to give you, which is
yes,
big creatures underwater, and it looks really cool, and it looks like it took a lot of time to make it.
Yeah.
And what we're also seeing is massive numbers overseas. Prior to COVID, a lot of big deal blockbusters, Jurassic, Marvel, et cetera, the expected split was something approximate, a third domestic, 2/3 overseas. Part of what happened during COVID, after COVID, partially because to a certain extent, they lost the Chinese market. And while China was often merely inflating the already impressive grosses of globally successful releases like Jurassic, like Marvel, et cetera, the math kind of got skewed to where we started seeing these big movies that were pulling closer to 50-50. Right now, with, I would argue, an underperformance in China, although it is recovering. It didn't drop as bad as everybody was expecting after that second Friday tumble. But still, it's probably going to make less in China than Jurassic World Dominion, which there are obviously lots of reasons for that, both related to COVID and related to the changing political ecosystem that is China right now. And that's not a good and evil conversation. As long as I still get to see The Wandering Earth 2, I'm happy.
Well, like you've said in other places, they are a market now that makes their own blockbusters. So
yes,
a Avatar: Way of Water is not the novelty it was 10
yes,
years ago or 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. It's a totally different ball game there. Hollywood doesn't have a complete ownership of blockbuster movies worldwide.
But even with China, I would argue underperforming a little bit, Avatar, and let me look this up to make sure I have the most updated numbers. I apologize. Yeah, it's pulling in an old school 30-70 split, which means it's making 31% of its money over in North America, and it's making 69% of its money overseas. It's already made $662 million overseas. It passed the overseas gross of The Rise of Skywalker on Sunday.
Amazing.
It is basically doing 3.25 times its domestic number worldwide. So all of this, what's it going to do domestic? What's it going to do domestic? Okay, triple that.
Right.
And that's where we are worldwide by the end. Do I think it's going to hit 2 billion? I don't know. But it certainly is still in the realm of possibility.
Is Maverick the only movie this year that has opened in 2022 and made over $1 billion?
No,
Did
Jurassic
Jurassic-
World Dominion squeaked into it.
It did squeak through it. Okay.
Partially thanks to China, which that is the biggest Chinese for a Hollywood movie. That's the biggest Chinese gross of the year with $160 million, which is good, but it was still well below Fallen Kingdom, which did 262 in 2018 out of $1.3808 billion, and the 225 ish for Jurassic World in 2015 out of $1.5 billion. So as you can see, even during the good times of between China and Hollywood, most of these films did not need Chinese box office to soar to infinity and beyond at the global box office.
Right.
Now, to its benefit or not, I mean, I know Cameron said 2 billion. That number seems to be in the ether. Do you think if this does not reach 2 billion, that the consensus just culturally will be that this movie was a failure, even though all evidence points to it not being? Do you think it's that simple that if this does not reach 2 billion, people will be like, Avatar 2 underperformed?
There will always be people that will look at a movie like this and find a reason why its performance is not good enough. It makes for clicky copy. It makes for viral social media content. This is exactly what happened 5 years ago with The Last Jedi, where you just had an entire ecosystem of people that just didn't get that the film was basically performing compared to Force Awakens identically to how Attack of the Clones performed compared to Phantom Menace, and as Empire Strikes Back performed compared to Star Wars. Even though, I mean, not to toot my own horn, I wrote articles about this before the movie came out.
Right.
Saying this is what might happen.
Right.
And that was the biggest grossing movie of 2017, domestically and worldwide. It made $1.3 billion. Yet somehow, some way, the narrative became that it was an underperformer because the trolls on YouTube and the trolls gaming Rotten Tomatoes user scores. And this is not to say that plenty of good, decent people had subjectively valid reasons for not liking The Last Jedi, obviously. But, I think it's very clear when you watch The Rise of Skywalker that somebody at Disney or Lucasfilm mistook online whining for mainstream consensus.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. They didn't just go by the numbers, which clearly said people like the second one fine.
High selling Blu-ray, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
That being said, Avatar 3 is mostly done from what I gather. It's not like Disney's going to go, oh no, you only made $1.75 billion. Let's make a bunch of changes and, appeal to Reddit.
Right.
That ain't going to happen.
Right. As far as we know, Joss Whedon is not coming into, or not Joss Whedon, J.J. Abrams. Sorry, definitely not Joss Whedon.
Joss Whedon is definitely not coming in.
J.J. Abrams is not coming in to direct Avatar 3. So I think we're safe there.
As far as the whole, will this make it to 5 movies thing? I mean, to Cameron's credit, he said one thing he said on the press tour that was more modest, humble, is like, look, if this film doesn't perform, there is a way for me to finish this with 3 films.
Yeah.
I'm not going to end this on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And, to Warner Brothers' credit, that's exactly what they did with Fantastic Beasts. That film operates as a soft finale to what is now a 3-part Fantastic Beasts trilogy.
Is that done? Is that there is no Fantastic Beasts 4 script out there?
To my knowledge, there's no
actors are not
script,
blocking off time.
Is it possible that David Zaslav will get desperate enough for Harry Potter-ish content and greenlight a Newt and Tina run around the world catching Fantastic Beasts HBO Max show? Maybe.
Right.
But I think other than that, I think that part of the franchise is dead.
Right. So I think, is there anything else we want to touch on for Avatar Way of Water that we haven't?
It's a huge hit by any rational standards. It opened well. People bitched and moaned about the $134 million opening. By any rational standards, a movie that opens to $77 million and then spawns a sequel that opens to 134 is a breakout sequel.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And like we've talked about, this is not a Marvel movie where people needed to go opening weekend because they're afraid of spoilers, because they want to know which actors have been signed to contracts to do cameos, what actor got their quote and gets to be in an end credit sequence. It's just a movie that people go to when they have the time to get to it over the holidays. So
It's funny because on one hand, I would say that you're right. For the record, I'm not disagreeing with you in any way, shape, or form. But that this is not a film that's got to see it before you get spoiled. Blah blah blah. That being said, I think there are character beats and plot moments in this that are genuinely shocking for a film that wants to be a all quadrant mega movie.
Yes.
And I think it's to the film's credit that it goes there.
Oh, it goes there.
And it's funny, James Cameron gave an interview where he said he cut 10 minutes of gun violence out of the film.
Yeah,
which
I just read that.
That's fine, his prerogative. But it was funny because I'm watching the film on the first screening, and it did feel up to a point like a kindler, gentler, more kid-friendly Avatar movie, where the violence wasn't quite as hard. You had whales knocking people into the water. Are they killing them? I'm not sure. And then, of course, the action climax, like, holy shit.
Yes, there is one pretty brutal moment in there. And you couldn't lose that. So moving on, we've got other movies that open 2, 3. We'll get to those, but I want to get to the other big movie that came and went this past weekend, Babylon. Damien Chazelle's follow-up to La La Land and First Man, and it's Brad Pitt and it's Margot Robbie. And I'm just going to throw out something that Clayton and I talked about a lot leading into the opening of this movie. Babylon felt like it was done a disservice by opening only a month or two after Margot Robbie's Amsterdam, a movie that everyone hated, deservedly so. That was a spectacular bomb. And Scott is doing the I liked it sign there, which is fine. Everyone can like what they like. And he's right. Okay. Well, see, this is the content you get on YouTube that you don't get on the podcast. So subscribe, links in the show notes. You get to see Scott actually say that he liked Amsterdam. But it was a movie that most audiences were perhaps wrong about, and they didn't like it. It was a spectacular bomb. And Babylon looked very similar in its marketing to Amsterdam. Stars screaming crazy things, running all over the place. Margot Robbie doing a Brooklyn accent. And we both think that this movie was DOA just based on the Amsterdam hate. And for other reasons, I think the marketing of this was pretty rough. It cried macho. That is the term that Clayton and I use when a big movie like this opens in that $4 million range. It cried less than macho.
And
it
wishes it cried macho.
It wishes if only to cry macho is what Babylon says. So Scott, why did this happen? And was it always destined to be this much of a disaster? Okay.
I mean, you could argue that a slightly, and again, how do you market this movie, which I kind of enjoyed it. And I don't think it's the kind of movie that necessarily deserves a ridiculously divisive reaction, but it's a 3-hour tone poem about the end of silent films and the rise of talkies. And it's basically a bunch of actors, some of them popular, some of them less well known, just basically gallivanting for 3 hours and getting into mischief. And there's not really a plot. It's something I tend to call a lazy river movie. Where you're just luxurious, you're just relaxing in this particular world that you if you like it, then that's very good. And if they had brought in Leonardo DiCaprio, could this have been as successful as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Probably not, but it probably would have done better than what we got. If they had cast Sandra Bullock instead of Margot Robbie, only because, all due respect, Sandra Bullock's the only actress right now that can pull in, actually put butts in seats right now. It might have done a little bit better, but not enough to make it a hit. I don't know how you market this film in a more conventional way. It's like I wasn't crazy about the trailers to The Fabelmans. They made it seem like it was a bit more treacly, if that's the word.
Yes,
schmaltzy
than it really is. And it's not. I mean, it really isn't. But
it's weird. It's a weird movie.
Do you also marvel? Do you instead market it as this somber, contemplative, somewhat depressing movie about a child living through his parents' divorce? That won't get anyone in the seats either.
Right.
We were
Um,
talking about the latest trailer for Babylon even really centered Tobey Maguire in a way that he's not in the movie
Huh.
for a very long time, but we were joking about the fact that, I mean, he's a Spider-Man, and guess what? A year ago, you liked seeing him as a Spider-Man. Maybe you like to see him as a yellow-toothed criminal. But that's the thing, is I really do think they had issues marketing this. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, this was a holdover from the last
Yes.
regime of Paramount. And then Brian Robbins still championed it. He wanted to,
Yeah.
and I think probably for Oscar purposes, right? You want an Oscar nominees and winners if you can. But is this a black mark for him?
No, I'll be honest. Here's why. This film is only a little bit more commercial than Martin Scorsese's Silence. As a film that opened to crickets in late 2016. But in 2016, Paramount was beginning what would be a 6-year-long losing streak, basically. If 2016 had come and gone and Star Trek Beyond had been a hit, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the Shadows had been a hit, and Whiskey Tango Foxtrot had been a moderate hit, and Christmas Office Party had broken out, except, Ben-Hur maybe even made a couple bucks, then Silence would have been one of those, for the love of the game, this is what Transformers pays for kind of movie. But because all those films were disasters, well, okay, and this one also flopped, but what the hell? Same thing with Mother the next year. If Transformers The Last Night had been huge, then it would have been worth it to make 16 or 13 hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, or whatever that movie, the full title of that is. And I remember when Mother came out, Paramount, I think it was Jim Goplinopoulos at the time, was like, I'm paraphrasing here, it's like, what the fuck? This is the kind of stuff you always say you want, and Netflix is cool because they release stuff like this, but when we put it out, whoa.
Right.
Obviously, that's heavily paraphrasing. But in 2022, Paramount pulled off the theatrical comeback of a generation.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
I've been writing their obituary in slow motion since 2016.
I mean, Studio of the Year easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
So I would argue, in the broad scheme of things, that Babylon being a financial disaster and probably not being a big Oscar contender, that stinks. But that's, it's like, okay, that's what Top Gun pays for.
Yes.
That's what Smile, the pure profit that is Smile goes toward.
Yes.
If you want to be a real movie studio, then, the tent poles are called tent poles for a reason. They hold up everything else, and they, Batman Forever kicks ass. So it's okay whether Bridges of Madison County is a big hit or a moderate hit or a small earner. That
is a great way to look at it. And I hope Paramount does look at it that way, where Babylon lost money, but Johnny Knoxville kicked in a couple of bucks.
Yeah.
And Ghostface from Scream kicked in
Babylon,
a couple of bucks.
brought to you by Jackass Forever.
I would see that.
I would say get from the studio that brought you Jackass Forever, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Scream
That's
5.
another. That was a huge. Jesus.
And Top Gun Maverick.
And Top Gun Maverick. Get that in this trailer. Make that be 30% of the next trailer for Babylon, is just listing off their 2022 slate from the studio that brought you.
And I don't want to spoil anything but I think that actually saying that this is from the same studio as Jackass, there's a few scenes in this film that would not be out of place in a Jackass film. So if you want to cut a trailer to get the kids to see this, there's a few scenes available to do so.
I think you could get Johnny Knoxville into a green screen studio and have him introduce some of his favorite clips from Babylon. And that is your trailer. Just go for it this weekend. Scott, we've all seen this. It might be the way to advertise this movie.
Now, the good news is that
that elephant would make such a great addition to the Jackass cast.
They might even do it in Jackass 5.
Yeah. There's a Fatty Arbuckle-esque character in this movie that I think that guy would be such an addition to Jackass 5 ever.
I do think its financial failure is just it's indicative of where we've been since 2016,
Yeah.
if not earlier, which is that movie stars don't put butts in seats with a few exceptions. DiCaprio, Bullock, and to a certain extent, Dwayne Johnson when the budget's under 150. Thank you very much.
We'll get to him.
Gerard Butler when when you can get a $15 million weekend and pop champagne.
Mm-hmm.
He is a genuine B movie star, at least he was before COVID.
Mhm.
And there are others that, again, part of the issue is that when Tom Cruise was kicking ass and taking names in the 80s, movies would cost $30 million.
Well, that's the thing. And also, Brad Pitt, I would say, is still clearly a movie star based on Bullet Train.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like you said, I don't know the movie star that makes this particular movie work.
Yeah,
You know,
other than maybe DiCaprio by default.
Yeah,
I don't know. Do you cast DiCaprio and Sandra Bullock and age it up a little bit, and maybe that works? I don't know.
It works better, but I've seen a lot of comparisons to Wolf of Wall Street in terms of this type of movie, and obviously, Wolf of Wall Street was a giant hit. Made what 300 domestic? Is that what it made? Worldwide,
which is still great.
It's insane for that movie. And I think that's still such an unfair comparison when you're talking about Babylon. Wolf of Wall Street was a movie star director in Scorsese, genuine mega movie star in DiCaprio, and just a story that was very easy to translate in a trailer.
It's
it was
sexy and of the moment.
Yes.
Skeezy Wall Street guy does bad things. Eventually, FBI puts him in jail. That was the trailer. You knew what you were going to get. Nobody knew what Babylon was going to be. It was.
You are correct.
I think there is a way of marketing this movie a little more clearly and centering somebody as the lead. And they just, as great as Paramount is and as tough as this movie is to market, I still think they did a pretty bad job of marketing it.
I generally hate to blame the marketing because that tends to be what happens when a movie that isn't commercial anymore, that maybe was a generation ago, underwhelms, or when a film that film Twitter thinks should be a hit, and sometimes they're right, does not deliver. And it's obviously the marketing. No, it's because people lie when they say they want movies like Widows. They're full of shit. They'll say they want movies like Widows, and then they'll go see Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald.
Right. They want 10-part series like Widows.
Yeah.
But they don't want a movie like Widows.
Or do they? I mean, other than if it's not on Netflix, nobody watches it.
What do you think this movie means, if anything, for Margot Robbie? I feel like she's getting most of the heat for this, especially that it's coming on the heels of Amsterdam.
I think there's a long history because it makes for good clicky content. It makes for viral content that when an ensemble film performs poorly, it amazingly becomes entirely the fault of the one female lead. Everything from How Do I Know with Reese Witherspoon, Amsterdam with Margot Robbie, Australia was somehow Nicole Kidman's fault and not Hugh Jackman's. The Invasion was somehow Nicole Kidman's fault, not Daniel Craig's. It makes for a sexier, sleazier, gossipy narrative of, institutional sexism, let's call it what it is.
Right. Well,
but yet somehow Brad Pitt is still a movie star.
Right.
Christian Bale remains unblemished. Paul Rudd remains unblemished, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, she's never been a butts in seat star to the extent that there are butts in the seat star anymore. I think that's very important to add that disclaimer. Just because people thought she was very hot in The Wolf of Wall Street does not mean that she's a butts in seat star. If on-screen thirst was, especially for women, unfortunately, then Megan Fox would be an opener. Not to be a dick about it. And honestly, that's one institutional problem that actresses face, and they've always, at least since I was growing up, which is that, stereotypically speaking, women will go see a movie because the guy in it is hot, but men will not do that for women. I don't know why.
Right.
I sometimes will, or at least it's an added value element. But does that make me a lech? I don't know, maybe. But at least they're getting my money.
I think with a lot of those examples too, a benefit that those big actors have is that they could have a bomb like Invasion or Australia or so on, or, you know, how do they know, or whatever that James L. Brooke movie was called. And then they could fall back into the safety of their IP franchises. You know, Daniel Craig could go off and become Bond, and Hugh Jackman could put the claws back on and be Wolverine, and Paul Rudd gets to go be Ant-Man. And they cling to the safety of these IP hits. And I think that this is a very lucky thing coming up for Margot Robbie, is that next year, the BO Boys prediction is Barbie washes all this stink away. That's going to be a mega hit, hopefully the start of a franchise. And Margot Robbie could go do these Amsterdams, if they still exist, and they will bomb. But then she could do Barbie and Barbie 2 and Barbie 3 and have that safety net. So
I hope so. But and again, I'm not saying I disagree with you. I think in all likelihood it will be a solid hit. But she had a franchise, and obviously, and mea culpa, I overestimated the appeal of her Harley Quinn as a butts and seats marquee character. Because Birds of Prey underwhelmed and Suicide Squad bombed, and she was a big selling point of both of those pictures. And I mean, I was not surprised by the Suicide Squad bombing. I wrote about it 3 years beforehand. You know, movies starring Will Smith that spawn sequels that don't star Will Smith tend to do poorly, because Will Smith, when he's in a franchise like that, is still a movie star. He's obviously hasn't been a movie star outside of franchises since Hancock in 2008, but I digress. And that's unfortunately the way of the world. I mean, it's marquee characters are what puts butts in seats.
Right.
You know, whether it's Michael Myers, Elton John, Deadpool. It's not just superheroes, although superheroes, by the virtue of their marquee status, have an advantage.
Right.
The other thing is there are some circumstances where you have a star plus character combo where it's kind of playing under their on-screen, off-screen persona in a way that is appealing. Tom Hardy being goofy as Venom. That works. The Angelina Jolie as Maleficent. That's a perfect freaking combo.
Right. Tom Hanks as a real life hero.
Yes,
Captain
exactly.
Phillips.
Although obviously it worked with Elvis, where he was a real life scumbag.
Yeah.
I mean, Elvis is IP, and Austin Butler. Maybe let's fingers crossed. Maybe we've got the start.
Maybe
If this were the 90s, we'd be able to safely say, boy, oh boy, we're about to crown a new movie star in Austin Butler. Unfortunately, this time next year, he might be starring in his Apple limited series, and you know, we don't get a big movie from him for 5 more years. Who knows? But,
and that's actually the safer route. I mean, I don't blame Kevin Hart for, you know, doing Netflix all the time now, even though he was an opener before COVID. He was sort of the last comic opener. But 3 years later, why risk it?
Right.
You know, you make Fatherhood was supposed to be in theaters, so whatever. But you release Fatherhood on Netflix. You know, they brought at 50 million views in the first month. It's a hit. There's nobody to challenge that. You're successful.
Right.
Now, since we're talking a little bit about Elvis, can we mention another movie that came out this weekend? The I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston movie. Now, we were very up in the air as to where she stood in the culture as an IP, as an icon, right? She's not going to, we knew she was going to reach the heights of Elvis. And we did have a snowstorm this weekend. We did have some inclement weather. We do have Avatar gobbling up a bunch of viewers. What does these numbers for Whitney Houston's biopic mean for her in general? Do you think this movie is pretty much DOA?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it opened worse than, you know, Respect last year. And again, I don't like to blame the marketing. I think the trailers were fine. I just don't think they offered anything exceptional.
Right.
Elvis sold itself as it's an Elvis movie. It's also a bonkers, bananas, pinball based, you know, Baz Luhrmann picture.
Right.
And with the exception of Australia, most of his films have been hits.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, I don't know to what extent the average moviegoer knows who that is, but the average moviegoer showed up to Great Gatsby and Romeo and Juliet and Moulin Rouge and that might be it because he doesn't work all that. He doesn't make movies all that much.
Right. But I think he at this point has broken through. I think Joe
Yeah.
Sixpack, Middle America, doesn't know what Baz Luhrmann sounds like, has never seen a Baz Luhrmann interview, read a Baz Luhrmann interview, but they know his movies now. And I think they know that they're interested in him. I feel like he is officially a movie star director. You know, he's in there with the
he might be,
Tarantinos
yeah.
and such, where his name counts the same as a star above the title.
Yes. And also, I mean, not to take anything away from everything that Warner Brothers did right in marketing that picture, but they got really freaking lucky that Top Gun went bonkers because almost every single person, including a shit ton of irregular moviegoers, older irregular moviegoers that went to see Top Gun in the month before Elvis came out, they got a snazzy trailer to Top Gun playing in the theaters. I'm sorry, a snazzy trailer to Elvis playing in the theaters.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's one of the huge challenges for marketing non-tentpoles these days is people don't see non-tentpole movies in theaters, so they don't see trailers for non-tentpoles. They don't watch as much commercial television so they don't see TV spots for these movies. And newspapers, they don't read the newspaper anymore, so they don't see posters and reviews for these films. How the hell are you going to market these films to anybody?
Right. They're not
Yeah.
watching The Tonight Show on Thursday night anymore and seeing the star of Friday's movie.
Yeah.
You know, next to Johnny or next to Dave or next to Jay. We'll give him his.
And even
props.
if they do, there's no crossover between viral internet content and whatever they happen to be promoting.
Right.
I mean, we know this in late 2016 when David S. Pumpkin did not help the box office fortunes of Tom Hanks's Inferno.
Yep. And people will be watching some Margot Robbie clip from James Corden in 3 weeks, long after Babylon has been pulled from all the movie theaters. So a lot of help that'll be.
Part of that is, to what extent is the movie star system damaged by these people that are almost always in your face, intentionally or not,
right?
Viral clips and whatever. I do think one huge reason why Sandra Bullock is still an ass star is that when she's not promoting a movie, she vanishes off the face of the earth.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. She knows not to post constantly, not to be talking about all these different things that aren't movie star related. She is elusive.
It's 8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Do you know where Sandra Bullock is right now? I don't. She could be right behind me. I wouldn't know.
Right. Right. And you know what? And I'm happy to not know until her next movie comes
exactly.
out.
And to a lesser extent,
I don't want her to
DiCaprio's
stand behind me. Right.
And I think without arguing direct correlation, because it's a little more complicated, I think someone like Dwayne Johnson is always promoting so many projects that he never goes away.
Yes,
all right, let's get into it.
That's my point. Thank you, Scott, for saying this.
You're correct.
Give us a break. Give me a little bit of.
And again, there are other
space.
issues. If Black Adam had cost as much as Rampage and Journey to the Center of the Earth 2 and Jumanji 2, Jumanji 3, and Skyscraper and Baywatch, so basically between $90 and $120 million, it would be a smash hit at 370 worldwide. But they spent. Initially, the official budget was 195. You've heard everything from 230 to 260.
Right.
Some of that's COVID, some of that's delays, some of that's whatever the hell is going on. And they, back in 2018, 2019, they probably expected 100 to 150 from China and Russia.
Right.
Which would have resulted in a face-saving $500 million total.
But would you say that even just domestically, forget the overseas, whether they expected more from China, the domestic total for Black Adam to me feels a little, and I've been saying this for weeks and weeks, is definitely disappointing that The Rock supposedly, sans Leo, the biggest movie star we've got, plus superhero, in a year where there's not a ton of superhero content. We had, up until Black Adam, had a break since Thor in July. So you would think all of that combined, it should have got higher than, what is it at, 165? 170 domestic. I mean, I've been saying for weeks, this is a huge disappointment. Okay.
I think the concern, and this was the concern going into the movie, was you have Dwayne Johnson, kid-friendly action fantasy movie star, DC film, superhero film, I would imagine a lot of those demographics almost completely overlapped. So
Mhm,
you weren't adding anything from putting him in that franchise. The
mhm.
film played like an above par Dwayne Johnson star vehicle,
Right, right,
but there was no uptick by virtue of it being a DC superhero film.
right. So
Or
you wouldn't say the
conversely,
hierarchy changed.
what was that?
You wouldn't say the hierarchy has
Well,
been.
it clearly did.
Mm,
It just, again, I've made this joke several times. It's like the end of Return of the King, where, Dwayne Johnson set out to change the hierarchy of power of the DC universe. And he did, but not for him.
Mhm. He
Yeah.
He
pushed
got
them
sent off to the
into
Great Havens or whatever.
they were like, well, we need to find our Kevin Feige now because this did not do what we thought it was going to do. So it made them even more desperate to lock down
Well, and
some sort of
this
like
is,
people to steer the
I
ship.
am of the long-standing opinion that Walter Hamada was doing exactly what we all said we wanted from the DC universe.
mhm,
Mhm.
And prior to COVID, his films were earning good to great reviews and good to great box office.
mhm.
And absent COVID, Wonder Woman 84 would have continued that trend. It might not have been a gajillion dollar, wouldn't have probably made as much as the first one, but it would have been a solid hit with decent reviews. Because I absolutely believe that the film being released on Christmas Day at some of the worst times of a god darn pandemic,
Mhm,
where everybody could hate watch it on Christmas because they were stuck inside and they couldn't go anywhere, absolutely skewed the critical consensus
mhm,
and the
mhm.
narrative around that film. And we're seeing that even with Knives Out or Glass Onion,
Yep.
where instead of having a leggy theatrical run where people that want to see it and they like it and the reviews are good, you're having the discourse being defined by bad faith assholes like Ben Shapiro, who never would have watched it in the first place if it was a theatrical picture.
Right. And out of context
Yes.
clips that become memes, which is,
Yes.
I agree with Wonder Woman 84. I didn't like that movie, but I feel like I like every movie better if I see it in the movie theater. And obviously
I
a
did.
giant
I was fortunate to
superhero.
see it in a theater. I begged and pleaded with Warner Brothers, and they did have a couple in theater screenings.
Wow,
And
that's stroke right there. That's what they call that in the business.
um, and I don't think I think it's a flawed picture, but I admire what it's trying to do. And I
Mhm.
think, without turning this into a Wonder Woman 84 debate, I do think it's a far more subversive superhero film than something like The Batman, which it's dark and gritty and about real world problems, because no one's ever done that before.
Right.
Mhm.
I mean, to be fair, there has not been a Batman movie that has had a Nirvana song in the
That is true.
soundtrack. So there you go. That's something new.
Um,
Nolan didn't do that exactly, but with
um,
Black Adam and with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, we talked about before, James Cameron, he sets that bar high. I got to make $2 billion, astronomical number. Whereas I think the one of the big problems here with Dwayne Johnson was the Deadline article, was the, hey, fact, I got off the horn with the finance guys and we've turned a profit and everything's great and God bless the fans, whatever that tweet was where he said this movie's a success right before he knew the hammer was going to come down at DC.
I am not arguing any insider knowledge because I don't
Mhm.
know, but I think he's done that before.
Okay.
Because he dropped an article in the summer of 2018 in Forbes. It was not
Mhm.
mine, but
Mhm.
somebody else in Forbes wrote this big buff piece glowing article about how Skyscraper was actually a hit because it made money overseas, as if it was
Right.
the first movie ever to gross money outside of North America.
Right.
And it was
right.
the biggest bullshit, what the hell are you selling here nonsense I had ever read.
Right.
And in retrospect, that's basically what he tried to do with Black Adam.
Yeah, it's funny because we were talking about this where he was laying out with his profitability chart or whatever he had, that list, all these downstream revenue sources that are saving graces for movies that fail at the
Yes.
theater.
Yes.
And so it was a failure at the theater. And then he just was proving it with these numbers, which are also faulty. So it was an insane thing to do.
And because you're dealing with a franchise here, even if it did eventually break even, that doesn't mean the world is, gleefully anticipating Black Adam 2.
Mhm.
Right.
Absolutely.
A Black Adam
I liked the
2.
movie. I thought it was fun, but whatever.
Did you see it in the movie theater?
I did.
The huge difference. I saw it on HBO Max the
that's
morning
your
it
fault.
dropped, and it was someone's fault for sure. But
Fair.
a Black Adam 2, I do think would be, and they know it would
Yeah.
be a disaster. It would be a movie that would not make $100 million
I mean,
domestic.
it's only slightly less disingenuous than if Jared Leto started going on social media and saying the world wants Morbius 2 because it was popular on Netflix for a couple days.
Yes, exactly. And I think Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is in a bit of a spot that I don't think he's been in since he made his career pivot around 2010, went to the Fast and Furious series, sort of like supercharged his career around that time. I think he's had pretty smooth sailing for a while. And this Black Adam DC situation is a ding on him.
It's a huge ding. And in this case, I'd argue the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Yes.
Because it's embarrassing. It's humiliating.
Yes.
And to the extent that, and again, I don't have any skin in the game or whatever, but the extent that he and his agent apparently like convinced Henry Cavill to quit The Witcher because Superman was waiting for him, blah 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 blah. I'm sure it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Right.
But from a narrative point of view, it's like you didn't just screw over your own franchise, you screwed over this other guy who you wanted to be in your movie for your self-serving reasons, and because you had the same representation. Not only did you get him in your movie, and not only did you sabotage that movie by talking endlessly about this cameo that in the real world nobody gave a shit about.
No.
If people wanted Henry Cavill as Superman, Henry Cavill would still be Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And I without getting into the Snyder discourse, I mean, the numbers are the numbers.
Right.
Batman v Superman is still the most front-loaded movie ever to open above $100 million.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Man of Steel was very front-loaded. Now
Right.
you can argue it wasn't Henry Cavill's fault, and he's a good actor. He's a charismatic person. As far as I know, he's a decent human being. I don't know,
Right.
but this wasn't a case of everyone loves Chris Hemsworth as Thor.
Right. Right. He could have been a fine Superman who does 10 Superman movies if the Superman movies he were in were better, but they weren't. And he's been stamped as the Superman in those bad movies people don't like.
If he had swallowed his pride a little bit and been a utility player like Mark Ruffalo has been with the Hulk in the MCU.
Yes.
Where he doesn't necessarily need his own movie, but he shows up as a huge added value element and brings, Superman's in this movie. That's interesting.
Right. Right. So where do we think this goes with The Rock? Because again, this is his biggest L I would say he's had in over a decade. He handled it incredibly poorly. He showed no humility. I think he's had a public backlash that I don't think he's maybe felt since he's left professional wrestling. I don't think he's been booed by a crowd since he was Hollywood Rock back in the 2000s. But I would say he's got to do some soul searching and figure out what his next move is. My big advice is be in something good for once. Because
make another snitch, damn it.
Make another snitch. I mean, listen, Clayton and I, the BO Boys, have said on this show, Dave Bautista, someday in our lifetime, will be nominated for an Academy Award.
Yes.
John Cena is earning raves as the Peacemaker. He's got to look to his fellow pro wrestler turned actor brothers and be in something good with auteurs, give himself to an auteur director, do some acting, but do something that is genuinely liked. That is our advice. Scott Mendelson, what is your...
I agree with that. I think he also needs to do Jumanji 4 because those were both terrific movies that made an ungodly amount of money. And I also think if you remember Jumanji 3, they set up a terrific cliffhanger where the characters in the game are apparently in the real world now. So now you're going to have the kids as humans interacting with these video game archetypes, which are the actual exaggerated versions in the video game.
Those were the two best movies I would say that Dwayne The Rock Johnson has been in.
I love Rampage. I think Rampage freaking rocks. Pardon the pun. It's actually my favorite video game movie.
Okay.
And I think he is very good in these films that are, relatively unpretentious, not trying to set box office records, and don't cost more than 120, 130. So they can be huge hits at $350, $400 million.
Yeah.
So I think he needs to do Jumanji. He needs to stop pretending that Red Notice is a great new franchise.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, he needs to, do a couple supporting roles in other people's movies. I mean, he got so much goodwill from being the supporting character in even bad movies like Be Cool, where he was the
Yes.
best thing in a bad movie.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Or even like Get Smart, where he was basically the best thing in an okay movie that made a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Hit-
was
Or he
great
went
in
against type by playing the villain.
he was great in Pain and Gain.
Yes. Yeah, he in a movie filled with good actors, he was terrific.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the one instance you could point to of The Rock giving himself to, and you may like him or not like him, but Michael Bay is an auteur.
Yeah.
He makes Michael Bay movies that stand out in a way that I think The Rock hires these directors who are basically,
Yes, men.
his crew. He's trying to do the Adam Sandler thing of you have your directors who make your movies, but Adam Sandler also goes and he does a Safdie Brothers movie and a PTA movie, and he does auteur movies along with having his buddies direct movies that he tells them how to direct them.
Yeah.
And he
to
budgets
be
his
fair,
movies properly.
I
Yeah.
do think Brad Payton is a skilled workman director. I think San Andreas, it's not my favorite movie or anything, but I think that works. And that's
Mhm.
another film that cost 110 million that looks a hell of a lot more expensive.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he did Rampage. And I think that is a interesting, I think it's a good, successful, kid-friendly PG-13 action fantasy that balances the line between being a video game adaptation and being just a bonkers bananas monster, adventure film.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And or even something like Hercules, which was sold as a rock vehicle, but it's basically an ensemble.
Right. So I mean, I think that we've put together a good list of piece of advice for one of the richest men on the planet, which
be
is
an actor again. You can afford it.
be an actor, be more humble about your L's. People like humility.
Because again, I mean, really, the cover up was worse than the crime.
Yes.
Black Adam was a moderate underperformer that came, had it opened in 2019 and had China gunning on all cylinders. It probably would have crawled to 525 and fine, whatever.
Right. Let's talk about, we mentioned Dave Bautista. There's a movie that everyone's talking about online for good or bad, which is Knives Out 2, Glass Onion. Now, this movie just dropped on Netflix on Christmas Eve, just a few days ago.
23rd.
23rd.
So
it
it's
had a
on
full
Friday.
3-day opening weekend.
People are memeing it. They're debating it. They've seen it. They've seen part of it and then fell asleep and then woke up and then it started again. Or,
and it only pulled the
Stranger
6th
Things is
biggest
playing.
debut ever for Netflix.
Yeah. Oh, what did you say there, Scott?
It only pulled the 6th biggest debut for Netflix.
Yeah. I mean,
And
all that money they spent and that's
all
what
that
they
money
got.
they didn't make because they didn't put it in theaters like a normal movie.
I mean, let's get into it. That box office run that Netflix had with Glass Onion back in Thanksgiving, they put it out for what? 7 days, 600 theaters, and it opened to, did it make 15 million in that run? It was somewhere
Over
around
under.
there. Yeah. So
the only thing it did, and this, not to be conspiratorial, this I believe was the reason they did this. They didn't open the movie in like early November when there wasn't anything opening, or late November to early December when there was nothing opening. They opened it on Thanksgiving weekend when there was a shit ton of other movies opening. I would argue the main reason to do that was to kneecap the competition.
Wow.
And
So
kneecap films like The Fabelmans and Devotion and Strange World that needed theatrical. When they didn't need theatrical, because they're dicks. And again, this isn't good and evil. They're all giant businesses here.
Right.
But
they're all evil, but why pick on the Fabelmans of all? Is it because is this the grudge against Spielberg where he's been the one who said Netflix shouldn't be part of the Oscars? He's one of those auteurs who's never done a Netflix movie.
He argued that the theaters should be playing those films, not that Netflix was bad for not showing them.
Okay. But there has been this Netflix versus Spielberg narrative. So
some of it's fabricated, but yes.
Okay.
And I again, I'm not arguing anything. I don't want to get sued for slander here.
No, of course not.
The thought crossed my mind.
What do you think if Netflix had just released Knives Out 2, Glass Onion to 4,000 theaters, given it let's say even they announced it, it will be out exclusively for 30 days before it drops on Netflix. Based on the small sample size we saw and the reviews and the audience reactions, I mean, our thought is that movie makes $50 million in that 5-day Thanksgiving window, and easy does 150 million in the first month domestic. I mean, is
Even
that
if
fair?
it's front loaded, because you have to imagine that people that don't see it in weekend 3 are just going to wait for Netflix.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I mean, assuming they put the money behind it in terms of marketing, and they figure out how to market a theatrical release where they have to do more than just put up a billboard in Hollywood and have it on the front page of the Netflix thing on opening day, which, to be fair, gets the job done for Netflix.
Right.
It's like, oh, this movie's dropping and no one's heard of it. There's no marketing. Well, 9 times out of 10, the only marketing they need is it's a thumbnail on the front page.
Right. Right.
That being said, yeah, I could have easily seen it done, 30, 40, $50 million over 5 days, and then letting out to 120 domestic and maybe 250 worldwide, or even 200. But again, and this is where I go to, films like, should Disenchanted be in theaters? Should Hocus Pocus 2 be in theaters, or et cetera, et cetera? You've already made the movie. You've already spent the money on the movie. The only extra money that you would spend is a theatrical marketing campaign.
Right.
And if you can justify it, then by all means throw it in theaters. What do you got to lose?
Right. And at this point, we talked before about how people don't watch TV commercials nearly as much. They're not watching the late night talk shows, blah, blah, blah. Could these theatrical marketing campaigns start to, I know you have to spend more to get the same amount of eyeballs you used to, but for a movie like Glass Onion, the biggest drivers are probably going to be people seeing the trailers for 3 months before the movie comes out. So if Netflix just was playing the Glass Onion trailer in a real way in movie theaters, that would be the biggest battle right there. And get the stars to do their interviews with all the publications they need to do interviews with the week leading up to the movie. And maybe don't then spend your $100 million campaign and see what happens. Because I think Glass Onion with just trailers and a real theatrical count probably does those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that's overly optimistic, and I don't know how I feel about that, what do you got to lose?
Right.
Because again, you've made the movie already.
So why then, in your opinion, why is Netflix, why did it stick to it? It didn't give it. People were hoping, oh, they'll expand the theater count. They'll keep it in longer. How could they turn down what's basically free money? And that's what they did.
The rational reason I can think is that they didn't want the blight of the film getting a full-on theatrical release and underperforming, especially compared to the first Knives Out, where you have a situation where Netflix, king of the world, somehow is crappier at marketing theatrical than Lionsgate.
So they were just scared of their own failings.
Again, I'm not, this is a suspicion, not an accusation.
Right.
The other thing is just they don't give a shit about theaters, and anything that helps theaters doesn't help them.
Right.
And I think that's what Bob, we'll see if different now that Bob Iger's back at Disney, but I think that was Bob Chapek's thinking, that he did not want theaters to be a major part of the Disney ecosystem. And the sooner they go out of business, hey, whatever, now it's all Disney Plus, yippee skippy.
Yeah.
And the only reason he didn't F around with the Marvel movies is because Kevin Feige would have left.
Right. And to me that maybe, listen, I'm not a CEO, I'm not worth hundreds of millions of dollars yet, but I do think it seems a little strange that a company just wants to get rid of what is historically their biggest revenue stream for their product, which is theatrical. I mean,
you are correct. It's insane. In 2019, Disney made $12 billion in global theatrical revenue. Now, they didn't get all that back because you have, splits, theaters, and studios. But that theatrical success drove below, ancillary, DVD, PVOD, EST, streaming eventually. But what they've done now in the last 2 years is not only have they undercut their theatrical revenue marketplace, they've absolutely decimated the post-theatrical, because everybody knows that anything Disney will eventually be on Disney Plus.
Right.
So there's no incentive to buy a DVD, rent it on digital, or buy it on digital, or rent the Blu-ray, because you wait another month, it'll be on Disney Plus forever.
Yep.
it's a crazy. I think it's even crazier now because, Wall Street has kind of turned on streaming in a way where they're like, it's not about subscribers. It's about making money, guys. You got to make some money.
What a novel idea.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, how did we not figure that out immediately, that this was all going to collapse like a house of cards? And here's the thing is that Glass Onion was a budding franchise that had a track record at the box office. And Netflix could have raked in money and they left money on the table. And like you said, they did kind of give a fuck you to theatrical. And then what really it made me mad was that you had these headlines saying, oh, Glass Onion solves the mystery of getting people to the theaters. And it's like they cannot benefit from the headlines for box office when they don't care about theatrical. That is just not
well.
fair.
They also don't officially release numbers, so you're doing whisper.
Yeah.
And the success of Glass Onion is entirely predicated on the success of Knives Out.
Yes.
Mhm.
What's the secret to getting people back to theaters? Make a sequel to a movie that did well in theaters that people liked. Whoa,
Yeah, I
Netflix
know.
is such a disruptor.
Crack the
Right.
code.
Right.
And again, Netflix is not good and evil. My issue is as much about how Wall Street treated Netflix as the one ring to rule them all, and they treated them like they were a tech company instead of an entertainment company. And I blame the rest of the industry, which, to be fair, was on some pressure from Wall Street to basically follow them all off the same cliff.
Mhm.
Right. So do you think that anything will change going forward in terms of Netflix's theatrical strategy? Do you think that they will look to their next potential big movie? And I don't know what that's going to be, because Netflix's movies have not been getting better these last few years. I mean, Glass Onion does start to feel like an outlier in terms of a Netflix movie that we think would do box office. But do you think they're going to be more theater friendly going forward, or this is what it is?
I would like to think that they'd start using theaters at least as a glorified marketing tool, as a way to separate the wheat from the chaff. And honestly, I wrote about this back in May 2021. I was hoping that's what they were doing with Army of the Dead, which is a rare Netflix mockbuster that feels like the genuine article.
Right.
I mean, again, without getting into the Zack Snyder discourse, I did see that in a theater, and I'm very glad I did.
Right.
It looks and feels and plays like a real movie.
Right.
And I'm very much looking forward to Rebel Moon.
Yeah.
I mean, him getting to play in the Seven Samurai meets Star Wars sandbox that he almost kind of sort of flirted with doing back in 2013. Awesome.
Yeah, it's
but otherwise, Knives Out, because it was such a theatrical hit, was the biggest Netflix original in terms of let's see what we can do with theaters. And they didn't take the shot there. I can't imagine there's anything there's no safer bet than a sequel to Knives Out.
I was going to say,
if they
this
didn't
was
do
the
it
one.
there, what the hell?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, what was
one.
that?
No, this was the one, and they didn't do it. So it doesn't make me believe that they have any plans to change the horse in midstream.
And it's like 20 years ago, if Warner Brothers wasn't willing to use Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman and Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut to fight for the NC-17, then it was never going to happen.
All right, so let's just quickly, there are a few movies that came out in this top 5 this week that we didn't touch on. I think the one we didn't touch on at all was actually the number 2 movie at the box office this week, Puss in Boots. Not Puss in Boots. It is Puss in Boots.
Yes.
The Last Wish. So that movie made over 20 million in its 4-day, right? And did it get to 26 million in its 6-day?
It did get to 26 over 6 days. Slight disappointment.
Okay.
It's certainly below what Sing did. Sing 2 did 39 million last Christmas. That being said, the film only cost about $90 million. It's very good. The reviews are spectacular, and for good reason.
Yeah.
There's not another animated film on that scale until Illumination and Universal Super Mario Brothers in April.
Wow.
It's going to be a freaking monster.
Wow.
Unless I'm missing one. If I'm missing one, I apologize.
I think you might be right. The rats are not going to have any new cheese for a long time.
To see legs that push this one to bad guys numbers, which is around 100 million domestic and maybe 250 worldwide.
Yep.
Which not a blockbuster, but $90 million movie that's going to make bank on PVOD.
Yep.
Mhm.
And it's gonna, when it goes to Netflix, assuming DreamWorks films still are, I don't know when that contract expires. It's gonna be huge on Netflix because Sing 2 was huge on Netflix.
Yep. Yep.
Now,
I
do you
think
think this was
without
affected? Oh,
overly kissing Universal's ass, I think it's very clear that they are the arguably the last old school movie studio left in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
Sony would like to be, and I think they're making good choices in terms of an old school theatrical window, and in
Mm-hmm.
terms of a huge, massive third party Netflix deal, which gives them a financial cushion to make movies like The Woman King and Where the Crawdads Sing. And I Want to Dance with Somebody. That
Right.
even if they don't break out and become huge hits, they're still going to be big on Netflix, and they're making money off it.
Right. Right. Right.
Paramount after this year, I don't know. Maybe they're back.
yeah.
A year ago, I sure as hell wouldn't have said that.
I
But
mean, they got Dead Reckoning Part 1 coming out in the summer, and I
they
think
got
that's going to
Rise of the
be.
Beasts, which I think is actually going to play off,
Mhm.
because it's a Beast Wars adaptation. You're going to have people that don't give a shit about Transformers, but they're going to show up because of Beast Wars.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
do you think this snowstorm that we had this past weekend and these theater closures, do you think Puss in Boots was probably the movie that got hurt the most because you got to pack your kids up, you got to put them in the snowsuits, you got to get them going, and it's maybe just easier to stay home or go directly to grandma's house as opposed to taking them to the
I
theater?
can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that being more of a factor than Avatar. Because I mean, the first Avatar opened during a horrific snowstorm in 2009,
Mhm.
and James
Mm.
Cameron was like, "Fuck Mother Nature,"
Right.
yeah.
Right.
and clearly he did that again.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, Puss in Boots. Yes, I can see otherwise interested families that either didn't go or waited or might just now wait for PVOD because they
Mm.
were snowed in, basically,
Mhm.
which
Now,
Mhm.
is unfortunate. But
yeah.
Universal, it's still the king of the hill in terms of theatrical animation, if only by default, because they've been kicking Disney's ass for 3 years, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Have you
Mhm.
heard anything about any future Shrek movies? Of course, Puss in Boots is part of the Shrekiverse. Does this
I haven't
make it
heard anything different than what you've heard. I'm sure they're in
okay?
some stage of development
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
a movie like that is always in development. It doesn't mean it's
Right.
actually going to get made.
Right. Right.
And I think there's easy money to be made in making another one. I can't imagine why they wouldn't, unless the only logical reason I would think for not making a Shrek movie is if Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz say no or ask for way too much money.
Right.
Mhm.
And then you
Right.
have to like hold your breath as like, okay, more so than most animated franchises, this one is banking on the stars.
Yes, all three would have to be back. But
Yeah.
I will say, so Clayton and I, we saw Babylon today, right off of we were in a mall on Long Island today. We found the BO boys found themselves on a mall. We checked out a Hot Topic just to see what the kids are still into. And there was Shrek merchandise in the Hot Topic. So the Shrek IP does seem to be still very strong with the young folks. And I think a Shrek sequel, even if Puss in Boots is slightly disappointing right now, the Shrek IP
But it's a
itself
great
is.
movie. So it instigates goodwill for the next one actually being good.
Well,
Yes.
we
Yeah,
want to
we
read
have.
you something right
Mhm.
now, Scott. And actually, Clayton, do you want to read this last part of an email we got from wannabe oh boy Eric? And he works at a movie theater. He had some boots on the ground reporting from us, but he specifically had something to say about Puss in Boots. So, Clayton, do you have that fired up in front of
I
you?
have it fired up. So Eric said, Puss in Boots seriously seems like it could be an intergenerational hit. At 9 p.m., when an evening showing ended, a middle aged man was embarrassing his family on the way out by enthusiastically dancing to the end credits music. Far away in another corner, there was a little boy who was dancing for a minute straight. These two gentlemen were unrelated at the theater with different parties and probably couldn't see each other. This movie is leaving audiences feeling energized.
The
Yeah,
big screen is back.
Yes.
it's the importance of the
Yeah.
big screen because
And you are right. It is a multi-generational nostalgic property.
yeah,
And yes, it's not opening as huge as, say, How to Train Your Dragon 3 or obviously Frozen 2 or Toy Story 4. But I
mhm,
would say to a certain extent, Antonio Banderas' Puss in Boots is a marquee character.
mm,
Um, Maybe that's on a curve. It's funny you say that. That's an interesting anecdote because I saw Shrek on opening night in 2001, and I knew it was going to be a monster hit when the film ends and everybody's singing and dancing to I'm a Believer, and basically every single person in the theater is to some degree toe tapping as they exit the theater.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. You want to leave happy.
And they have not. The kids have not had anything in the last couple months. I mean, Strange World was a disaster. Lyle Lao Crocodile was a certified bum. We've said it a million times. This movie could, I'm going to call it, I think this movie makes more than The Bad Guys. I see this movie doing more than The Bad Guys just because of these reactions.
Wow, big Bad Guys fan. Again, you got to subscribe and watch this show on our YouTube channel. Because I'm not even going to say the
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
No.
I thought it was a middle finger
crossed.
No. I
like the Bad Guys. Don't get me wrong.
I was hoping for a viral moment there, but it was fingers crossed.
I'm hashtag Team Puss in Boots all the way.
Wow, I was very excited for Scott Mendelson to be flicking me off. His co-host, his
just say something wrong about Shanghai Nights
everywhere. Oh, we never talk blasphemy.
No. So let's see. I would say within this top 5, top 10 here, any other stories? Violent Night is now up to job. It's doing the job. It's over 40 million. It's what, at 42 million domestic?
Yeah, 20 million domestic or 20 million budget from a 13 and change opening weekend. It's doing well on PVOD for what that's worth.
The BO boys were part of a post Christmas party last night or a couple of nights ago. And we all PVOD'd Violent Night. I'd seen it in the movie theater. Some other people in the party had seen it. Others hadn't. PVOD'd it. Raucous response in the room. Raucous response when I saw it in the movie theater. Scott, do we have possibly a little action franchise that could be started here? Or is there going to be Violent Night 2, Assault
Violent
on
Night
Santa's Workshop?
Nobody.
Yep. That's a crossover. Yeah, they're both
87, whatever.
87 North.
It's action for everybody. People are going to kill me. But no, I mean, if they want to make a sequel, yes, I think there's a market there.
Yeah.
I think more importantly, though, do you see David Harbour as a possible Gerald Butler level B movie action star? Is that a possibility for him? Is that his niche?
The reason I'm not sure is because I think part of the hook was a guy like David Harbour, who isn't known as an action star, playing John McClane Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm,
in the same way that, I don't think Bob Odenkirk, I'm sorry, I'm going to hell, whatever his name is.
Bob Odenkirk.
Odenkirk playing a John Wick type character was sort of a skewed anti-typecasting and nobody.
Right, okay. Right.
So it's like, when Taken came out, it was unusual to see Liam Neeson leading that kind of movie. And now it's sort of like, okay, that's all he does.
But also when we're talking about Die Hard, Bruce Willis was a comedic actor on a show, moonlighting, and he became an action star for the ages. So there's a possibility for David Harbour.
You're right. You know what? I am mistaken. Because same thing with Kurt Russell. Everything, trying to remake, Escape from New York. The whole point of that movie was that Kurt Russell was a Disney Channel star going hardcore.
He was the computer that wore tennis shoes.
Yeah, if you want to do that today, you cast Noah Centineo or whatever his name is, who's terrific, by the way, on The Recruit. I think the show is very good for the first 4 episodes when it's a television show. I think it's very disappointing for the last 4 episodes when it's an 8-hour movie. But he is very good. It's the kind of incredibly charismatic and charming and whatever star vehicle that we always talk that today's movie stars don't get in theaters. And but watching it's like, oh, okay, that's why girls want to fuck him. Now it makes sense.
Right. So David Harbour remains to be seen. He could make that pivot. That's the thing about minting new action stars, is anyone could get jacked if they put their mind to it. So Kumail is
a perfect example of that. Nobody would have called Kumail
after A Quiet Place and Get Out. I'm waiting for Al Penn's masterpiece horror movie.
Yeah.
So let's see. Anything else, Scott, that you want to touch on in terms of just big picture stories you've seen from these last month or two at the box office? I'll throw one thing out there. Prestige Oscar movies. In the past, listen, even in the heyday of the 90s, you'd have Oscar bait. that didn't connect at the box office, but it does feel like we're really hitting a tipping point.
We are. I mean, even as recently as 2017, you
Mhm.
had Hidden Figures and La La Land both topping 150 domestic in
Right.
December 2016, January 2017,
Right.
right alongside Split and Rings and other less successful films like domestically Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage. And that even 2019, just before COVID, you had Little Women
That's
cracking 100 million. You
God.
had 1917 racing to 350 worldwide. I mean, it's
Once upon a time,
we were almost there.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood made 150 domestic.
Yeah, it
You
made
had
141 domestic, 375 worldwide, and that
Uncut
was after it
Gems.
got blackballed in China.
Yep.
Uncut Gems at 50.
Yeah, we were so close.
Yeah. That's the movie right now that is in trouble.
Yeah.
Is Uncut Gems made 50 million domestic in fall 2019. And that's sort of a movie star vehicle, but it was Oscar bait adult drama. And the equivalent to that right now is a Tar or a Fablemans or an Armageddon. Well, not an Armageddon time. That's a much smaller movie than even Uncut
that
Gems
was never
was.
gonna.
But something like Tar or
I
Banshees
will
of
say that I
Inisherin.
think Uncut Gems was able to sell itself as an Adam Sandler thriller.
Yeah. That.
I mean,
but
I
Little
would
Women
say,
making
I like
100 million
both, but
domestic.
yeah, I would say that Uncut Gems is more commercial than Tar, which is basically a tone poem passion play.
Right. But a
Another
Banshees of
film
Inisherin.
that,
A Banshees of Inisherin, even I would say if this exact movie opens in 2019, it's doing 25 million when all said and done. It's
I agree
maybe
with
hitting
you.
30. And now this is a movie that I don't think it made 10 domestic.
The only Oscar season breakout, other than The Woman King, unless I'm missing one, is Terrifier 2.
Yeah. I mean, from your lips to God's, vomit is what I would say.
Special
that movie
effects nomination. Special effects nomination.
It
didn't-
deserved one, but it didn't make the short list.
It did make the short list, Clayton. So
Okay.
but it was
to be fair,
was Oscar
Everything
bait.
Everywhere All at Once didn't make the short list, which is insane.
That's insane too. Yes.
Yeah.
So it might win Best Picture, but it's not going to win Best Special Effects.
So I think that is the type, and Everything Everywhere was a big hit, but it was. I mean,
I don't know if that means anything other than just false hope.
Yeah, it was also sold as an action movie, as a comedy, as a multiverse movie. So
and to be fair, at least in America, Hollywood, whatever. Has there ever been a non-action movie with action as good as what we saw in Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Not that I can think of. So that is a genre that does feel like it's in a little bit of trouble, which is, adult movies that are very specifically only dramas, only awards bait, only prestige. That is now a genre that are they going to be able to justify making that 3 years from now? And it's the thing is, it's the type of movie that most actors and most writers and directors get into the business to make. So can the box office justify the budgets of those movies 3 years from now? It is
up to the audience to show up.
Yeah.
And I've been saying that for 7 years because this is not a new problem. I think once the large swaths of the general movie-going audience, the ones that would see the event films and other stuff, once they started looking to streaming as their first choice for general casual filmed entertainment consumption, that's when the bottom fell out on the studio programmer.
Right.
And that's why you have an actress like Margot Robbie who is treated like a star, but there's no middle of the road vehicles for her. It's either a franchise or, commercially doomed auteur project.
Right.
Even Jennifer Lawrence can't get a mid-level movie made.
And
she gives one of her best performances in something like
Causeways.
Causeways. And it's on Apple, so nobody watches it.
Yeah, I think what's really scary about these movies or for these movies and their fate is that there was always going to be room for Oscar movies, right? There's always going to be room for a studio to be like, we want to win that gold, and people aren't caring about the Oscars anymore. So if the Oscars become so sidelined these movies are going to become even more sidelined. And I think that's with the lack of people interested in the awards, these movies are going to be even less likely to be made, and that's what's scary.
And what's unfortunate, and we saw this last season, we had people bitching about, oh, why don't the Oscars nominate more populist movies? Which actually means why don't they nominate Spider-Man No Way Home?
Mm-hmm.
Which is that the kind of movies that were nominated, Coda, West Side Story, King Richard, they used to be populist films. People used to go to those even 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Mr. Holland's Opus used to make a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not that it's not that the Oscars stop nominating movies that people like to see. It's that people stop seeing movies.
Right. Right. And it's, there is something to, in the public consciousness, the White Lotus is a bigger deal for adults than the Fabelmans.
Yes.
That is where people are going to get their stories, to get their, above average, talk about the plight of humanity drama. They're going to the White Lotus. They're not going to Armageddon Time. They're not
And in a
going to
skewed way,
Tar.
HBO, if it still wants to maintain its brand, and I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
Zaslav has in store,
Mm-hmm.
and Apple, which very much wants to be the next HBO and doesn't have a crap ton of IP, might be the last hope. Because my fear is that as every studio gets their own streaming platform and they're fighting for attention and they're fighting for media coverage and they're fighting for oxygen, we are starting to see them become as obsessed with IP and franchises
Mm-hmm.
as theatrical studios were.
Right.
I mean, thank goodness for Tyler Sheridan's Yellowstone thing, which, yeah, it's an IP, but A, it's new to cinema. B, it's the kind of, whether it's Yellowstone or 1923, or even, the other stuff that isn't Yellowstone affiliated, Tulsa King and
Mm-hmm.
the Mayor of Kingstown. Those are the kind of TV shows that used to be what peak TV was all about.
Right. Right.
But even now, those things are endangered species because they're all banking on Harry Potter this, Game of Thrones that, Ring of Power that, Star Trek this.
Right. It's a interesting landscape, but I think that this year did teach us. I still will say that if the product is there, people want to go to the movies. I think we have officially relearned that in 2022. We had these droughts. This fall drought was rough, and people aren't going to go make a blockbuster out of I know you liked it, but out of what most would say is a bad movie like Black Adam. But if there's good product, people still want to go. And what do you think? Let's sort of wrap up by looking forward just a bit. What is your big picture outlook for 2023? Do you think that the release schedule, the slate, is returning to more of a pre-pandemic state of normalcy? Do you think that there will be enough product?
Certainly is.
Okay.
So I think from March to at least August, and I'll be honest, I'm not looking at September, October, November.
Right.
I could be mistaken. There could be plenty of stuff there. I think from March to August, at least, it's going to be business as usual, which is a hell of an improvement on last year. Right. Basically, you had April was busy, June was busy, July was kind of busy, and then jack shit for the rest of the year, save for a couple tentpoles.
Yep. Now, this year, we still were seeing a lot of big moves out. Remember, when this year started, we thought Creed 3 was going to be a Thanksgiving opener. Black Adam was supposed to come out late July. The Flash was supposed to come out this year. I think Aquaman. There was that period we thought Aquaman and Avatar Way of Water were opening the same day. So there were a lot of moves this year that weakened the schedule. I'm hoping that that's not going to happen next year, that suddenly Super Mario Brothers isn't going to be moved to 2024. I think a lot of those
were moved to make sure they could finish on time. Because I think Mario was supposed to come out this December, and then Puss in Boots was supposed to come out September. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was supposed to open this September, got moved to next June. Black Adam was from July to October, and that was one reason why there was such a lack of theatrical releases. The one optimistic thing is that box office is down by almost the identical amount to percentage wise to the amount of movies in wide theatrical release. So if there are as many movies in theaters as there were in 2019, 2018, 2017, then theoretically the overall box office should be about on par, give or take.
Right, right. And if the main way that people are going to learn about movies is movie trailers in theater at this point, the only way that's going to happen is year-round product to get people
Yeah.
into movie theaters. You know, because
And
television isn't doing it anymore.
no. And I think with the bottom falling out in the streaming boom, or at least Wall Street changing its mind on a dime, which I mean, keep in mind, Disney stock got hammered because Avatar only opened to 441 million last weekend.
Mhm, mhm.
And you think they're going to recover now that the film's actually playing like a James Cameron movie? I don't know,
Right,
but
right.
that happens because Wall Street's dumb.
Because Wall Street, look at that opening number. They don't get the analysis. They're not
Yes.
listening to the BO boys. They're not reading Scott Mendelson. Tell them what those numbers really meant.
Yeah.
And then they're not looking at the legs.
Yeah.
You know, because Wall Street guys, they're not leg guys like us.
No, they don't. Yeah, they never look back, and they yeah. I do think we're going to see a pattern that this has been an issue since 2015, and it's getting worse, which a larger percentage of the overall box office is going to be made up of a smaller portion of theatrical releases. In 2011, it was 16%. 2018, it was up to 26%. 2019, when Disney was, throwing everything out, whatever, it was closer to like 39%. And this year, once Avatar is finished, it's going to be around 41%. But I apologize. I missed the 41% of the top 6 movies.
Right.
Top 6 movies in 2011, 2018, 2000, whatever, made up X percentage of the overall box office. And in my opinion, that explains everything we complain about. Why aren't people seeing more regular movies? Why aren't people seeing more diverse movies that they claim to want, but then ignore when they're in theaters? Why aren't there movie stars, et cetera, et cetera? Because while people are still going to theaters, overall box office was up before COVID. Ticket sales were down, but not drastically so. And honestly, ticket sales have been pretty, it's not as horrible as inflation notwithstanding, as people like to say. I think even if tickets are tilting more toward premium auditoriums and dinner theater and stuff like that, well, if you're selling more food, then that's a win-win for theaters.
Right.
Or if you're buying a more expensive ticket because you bought for IMAX instead of 2D DLP, then the theaters and the studios are both getting more revenue from that ticket sale. Win-win. But audiences are, and again, these are people that don't obsess about the movies. They don't obsess about franchises. They half the time they don't know if Morbius is actually an MCU movie, and they don't care. They sure as hell don't care who Ezra Miller is. And it's so much of this online nonsense. None of this is about the real world, and that's why it drives me nuts when it makes up so much of the discourse.
Here's a call for a prediction. Is The Flash going to get a full theatrical release?
Yes.
Next year? Okay.
Unless Miller returns to a life of crime, allegedly. And I mean, actually, and again, I'm being hyperbolic, kill someone or something.
Right.
If they do another burglary, whatever. But to be fair, we have not heard from them in a few months. And what I always predicted was that they were going to go into treatment, and just in time for promotional tour, they were going to come out all healthy and sober. And the rehabilitation was going to be the upworthy part of the Flash's promotional campaign.
Right. A key
triumph over mental illness.
Right.
An
Oprah
as cynical
interview.
as that sounds, if it's true, great, wonderful.
Right. Okay. So The Flash coming out. And final thing I'll ask, since we're on the superhero DC stuff, do we think that the sort of turnover at DC, the fact that they're rebooting the continuity, all that, will have any effect on the DC movies that are still coming out? Shazam, Aquaman, The Flash.
I don't think so, because I think at the end of the day, David Zaslav wants to make revenue. So he's not going to do anything that will undercut the present tense revenue that those films will theoretically deliver. And I think the average human being, moviegoer, does not give a shit if everything's connected. They're going to see Aquaman Lost Kingdom because they thought Aquaman rocked.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
They're going to see Shazam Fury of the Gods because they really liked the first Shazam movie.
Right. Right.
And everything else is just for YouTube and the blogs.
Right. And it's same thing on the Marvel side. Are they in a downswing? Are they level?
I
Or
think
is
you may be reaching a point that for regular Marvel movies that don't, go crazy, that there is a ceiling of over under 800 million and over under 400 million domestic.
right. Which is
Fine.
fine. Right.
Still a lot of money.
Yeah, still, especially if they take that into account when budgeting. So maybe
Right.
the next one only cost 180 instead of 220.
Right. Right. Maybe you just make it an hour and 40 minutes and you spend a little less and we all
Well,
win.
Thor 4 was short and it was still pretty bad.
Yeah, that's true. Clayton, any final question on your end? Anything for Scott Mendelson as we look ahead to next year? Any final thoughts from anyone here?
No, I mean, the only other question I would have is we talk about how, and we've had guests on the show just talk about how we're a little bit overscreened in this country. We have more screens than we need. And our thought, or at least my thought, is that we need more premium screens. We need more PLFs because there's a complaint that, well, people just won't pay to see movies. And it's because they're not going to pay to see a movie at a regular theater that doesn't have premium sound, premium screens, good lighting, things like that, comfy seats. What is your thought on that? Should there be more IMAXs and
Yes.
PLFs?
I do think the more you are promising a moviegoer that they will have a high quality audiovisual experience as a matter of course, not just if they get lucky, then the more likely they'll be willing to go to a theater to see a movie.
Mhm.
My only caveat with the whole, we have probably a saturation of screens. And I think there will be theaters that close, unfortunately. But you also have to, and I don't know the answer to this. This is a dilemma because that also clashes with the idea of I would have seen The Fabelmans, but it wasn't playing anywhere near me.
Right.
And
Right.
the more theaters that close, the more likely you're going to have that situation where there really is only the Marvel movie and the Jurassic film and the Fast Saga flick playing at a theater anywhere near you.
Right. Right. You'll have the movie deserts where, listen, we're coastal elites. You're in LA. The BO boys are in New York. I listen, I saw White Noise in a movie theater. We'll be able to see those movies, but you're going to have middle America living in the stacks, the Earth Dogs and the Plain Billies, and they're not going to be able to see, like you said, the Fabelmans, Armageddon Time. These are just movies that basically won't exist if we start knocking down movie theaters. But the hope is that you maybe get rid of a few screens, you combine some theaters, have bigger screens, and let the Fabelmans get a couple of days in a premium screen because now we've got more of those. So
yeah, that's true. And the other downside to that is, when people talk about, oh, they don't make movies for real Americans or they don't make movies about regular people, and that's not true. But, and this is a problem that's only gotten worse over the last decade, when those films do get made, they don't get wide enough to actually be seen by the demographics they're about.
Right.
I mean, it's great when you make Nebraska, except it never goes wide enough to play to Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, the truer words have never been spoken. So Scott Mendelson, I think we thank you for all the time you've
you're
given
very
us.
welcome.
Yes, thank you so much.
And tell us again, how could our wannabe boys, wannabe girls, wannabe people continue to follow you? You are now at the Wrap.
I'm at the Wrap.
Mhm.
I'm doing work there. I am still at Twitter at Scott Mendelson, and that's basically it.
All right. Well, there you go. So, of course, everyone can keep following us. Send us emails, theboboyspodcast@gmail.com. We love getting your emails, reading your emails, reading your well wishing. So keep sending us those at theboboyspodcast at gmail.com. We're on Twitter at theboboyspod. So we've got wannabe intern Christopher, who is making great videos for us there. Lots of clips, lots of audiograms. So follow us on Twitter at the BO Boys Pod. And of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You could see what was the hand gesture that Scott Mendelson gave Clayton earlier when we were talking about Puss in Boots.
For luck.
Listen, it's up to interpretation. It's one of those things. Did Did Carrie Styles spit onto Chris Pine's lap? Who
He
knows?
did
Who knows?
not.
Well,
And you
Um,
know it.
yes.
but you
well-
still have to go to the BO Boys YouTube channel to find out for sure.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think that's it. So everyone, I think we did it, Clayton,
We definitely did it. I don't think there's anything left to say
except
until next time.
we'll smell you at the box